31,000, 45,000, the story of two trains of French resistance. A podcast by Mathieu Landour-Engel.
Renelde Lefebvre, 45,761, with a question mark. The selection. Today is the 6th of July 1942, and there was a selection a couple of days ago. 1,175 hostages have been selected as communists, 50 as Jews, 24 as undesirables. Their deportation has been decided as retaliation after several recent communist attacks against the German army on a special order by Adolf Hitler. The hostages are getting out of the Royal Camp in Compiègne and walk silently to the train station. Amongst them, there is Renelde Lefebvre. Renelde Lefebvre is not just one person. Renelde Lefebvre is a family. He is the son of two teachers. His father recently became director of the Saint-Denis school near Paris. As such, he wasn't encouraged to show any political opinion, yet some knew his point of view. At 16 years old, Renelde left his family and decided to join de Gaulle's army in July 1941. France lost the war, sure, and the new French government called for a ceasefire. Yet some generals disagreed. One of them, the General de Gaulle, left France to the United Kingdom and spoke at the BBC radio. He gave hope, telling that the war wasn't over, inspiring anyone to join him and his army in the United Kingdom.
J'invite les ingénieurs et les ouvriers français spécialistes de l'armement qui se trouvent en territoire britannique ou qui pourraient y parvenir à se réunir à moi. J'invite les chefs, les soldats, les marins, les aviateurs des forces françaises de terre, de mer, de l'air, où qu'ils se trouvent actuellement, à se mettre en rapport avec moi. J'invite tous les Français qui veulent rester libres à m'écouter et à me suivre. Vive la France, libre, dans l'honneur et dans l'indépendance.
Very few heard that call. On the 18th of June 1940. The BBC agreed on giving a few more slots to de Gaulle, 5 minutes in French in the evening, so he spoke again on the 19th, the 22nd, 24th, 26th and 28th. Then the French population started to know who that man was. Renelde heard the call and left his family. He decided to join the United Kingdom by all means. He walked from Saint-Denis to the coast and he made a plan. He would find a boat. He would cross the channel on his own. How can you do that? Where can you find a boat? The British coast was 30 miles away. Should you train at least a little before hopping on a boat? And most importantly, how can you avoid the German army? Germany and United Kingdom were at war. The coast was heavily protected. Surely a young man with a boat would be noticed. Renelde was convinced he could achieve this, but he made some mistakes along the way. At first, he thought he could find a network of women and men who could help him cross the channel, but soon realized that there was no such thing. He stayed at a place where the landlady was very close to the German, so Renelde preferred to leave. He stayed at a fisherman's place, yet once he explained the man his goal, he threatened to call the police. Once again, Renelde had to find another place to sleep. He found a young man like him, ready to cross the channel, yet he gave up and left Renelde alone. Finally, he purchased a small canoe, yet there was a hole on it. Renelde didn't give up. He stayed around, with the same goal in mind. He started repairing the canoe. The wind turned. The wind turned because he met two pairs of young brothers, Christian and Guy Richard, and Jean-Paul and Pierre Lavoie, with the same goal, a place to sleep, a solid organization, and most importantly, another canoe. They trained for months on the beach, right in front of the German soldiers, convinced the 5 young men couldn't possibly dare such a feat. Renelde even made friends with them. The soldiers even helped with the repairs. On the evening of the 16th of September 1941, Renelde and his 4 companions waited for the German patrol to finish its round. They jumped on their trusted ships and started their journey. They knew they had more chances navigating by night. It would be easier to avoid any German ships, yet the adventure turned harder than expected. The water was too clear, the boats were too easy to spot. They expected to cross the channel in 10 hours. It took 30 hours of wind, waves, cold, and they didn't bring nearly enough food. 30 hours of nightmare, with maybe at the end, the hope of freedom. War still, yet war with hope, rather than defeat. War with the feeling of being on the right side. They made it. They landed on the British coast, safe, exhausted. The British authorities took care of them, impressed, also a little suspicious. But it didn't take long to see them as who they were, brave kids. 2 days later they were brought to meet with the General de Gaulle. Another day later they met with the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. It must have been impressive for those 5 young men to meet such important figures. It must have been even more impressive for Churchill and de Gaulle to meet with such brave and hopeful figures. There it is, the true face of France, Churchill said as he looked at them.
5 French boys meet the Premier and his wife at number 10. The boys, who were fed up with being ordered about by the Germans, decided to come to Britain, and they did, by canoe. A daring voyage even in peacetime, how much more so under present conditions. No wonder Mr. Churchill called for champagne. In a very happy scene, they all toasted the escape from the Nazis and drank to the downfall of Hitler. One more episode which points to the increasing spirit of resistance.
Their exploits crossed the sea, quicker than on canoes. Several clandestine radio transmitted interviews. Renelde's mother and father were told by friends of Renelde, leaving them reassured and proud. Yet, others heard about it. Those who envied, maybe, the resentful ones. Not everyone disagreed with the French government, with the Vichy government, and what can be inspiring for some can be treason for others. So Renelde's exploits became as much a reason to hope than an example to make, a warning for those who would try again, and what would happen to their families if they did. Back to the present, everyone is walking towards the train station in Compiègne. More than 1,000 people in a train. It's impossible for them all to get in. More than 1,000 people in a train. It's impossible for them all to get in. Renelde is amongst them. He knows no one in the group. In the distance, his wife, waiting around. They can't join. They aren't allowed to even touch hands. They can only speak in the distance. Renelde tells his wife to wait. He's positive he'll be back soon, even though no one has any idea where they are going. How can Renelde Lefebvre be in 2 places, United Kingdom and France, London and Compiègne? That's because Renelde Lefebvre is not just one person. He is a family. He is both the son and the father. They share the same first and last name. Renelde's father was arrested on the 28th of April 1942, denounced by a neighbor, most probably bitter of seeing a father so proud of his son. And the German wished to make an example of his son, even though they couldn't arrest him. Renelde was proud of his son. He couldn't hide it. You can't hide that sort of thing. You just can't. Thank you for listening to this episode of 31,045,000, the story of two trains of French members of the Resistance. My name is Mathieu Landour-Engel, and I don't consider myself as a communist, nor did I ever vote for the Communist Party. This episode was about Renelde Lefebvre, the father and the son, as they both shared the same first and last name. I will start by explaining a little more the order of deporting 1,175 men on the 6th of July 1942, which is the main starting point of this project, with the deportation of 230 women in January 1943. This train is the first repression and political train to leave France with Auschwitz-Birkenau as destination. The second train will be the movement train in January 1943. Other trains will follow, yet they won't go to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and there are countless other trains which went to Auschwitz, yet those were persecution trains, they were trains of Jewish people. This train was a long time coming. The German administration warned for a long time that if sabotage acts from the communist resistance were to continue, they would soon execute or deport hostages. Many hostages were executed in the past years, yet acts of sabotage kept on happening, so a system of deportation was put in place. The first trains to leave were actually labeled as retaliation convoys, yet there were trains of Jewish hostages, so it could be argued that this retaliation system to fight acts of sabotage in French territory were a good cover-up for deportation and the extermination of the Jewish population in France. The 6th of July convoy is unique in this sense, as it is the only French masculine communist train to leave to Auschwitz. The list of the 1,175 men has not been found, yet we know the list of the 1,170 men who arrived at their destination. I will explain in the next episode why that number changed. Those men have been carefully chosen to represent a broad spectrum of the French population. Half of them were already in the Royal camp, the other half were in several other camps such as Rouillé, Vauve, etc. Camps that I mentioned in previous episodes. There were men between 18 and 55, most were communist, although there were a few who weren't. They were for the most part from the occupied part of France, although some were originally from the no-occupied part of France, yet arrested in the occupied part of France. They were workers for the most part. Some were students, syndicated men, some townsmen. There was one deputy, Robert Philippot, which I mentioned in one of the previous episodes. Also men from the international brigades, such as Christophe Lemaire, whom I mentioned also in the previous episode. It was a broad spectrum. It was meant to be a broad spectrum. They were an example of threat. This selection was made by German authorities, yet they asked every department of France to send them smaller list of potential communist militants hostages, so you could easily argue that it was a French and German joint effort. The last 50 French Jewish prisoners from the Royal camp were included in that list. All the other French Jewish prisoners from the camp had already been deported to Auschwitz in the previous months. 18 men, mentioned as undesirables, were also in the list. I will talk more about them in the following episode. Now the story of Renelde Lefebvre and his trip to the United Kingdom is a true story from his training to his arrival and his meeting with Winston Churchill and the General de Gaulle. He then became a sub-lieutenant, participated to the liberation of France. He unfortunately died fighting in France on the 26th of January 1945. Renelde's wife, the father, indeed managed to meet with her husband on the 6th of July 1942, before he left France, and she met again with her son in 1944. I don't know whether Renelde's parents were proud of their son reaching the United Kingdom, nor what type of relationship they had. I can only assume. What is known, though, is that letters of denunciations were written accusing the father to be proud of his son, who betrayed the country by reaching the United Kingdom. The father was also probably a member of a Gaullist resistance network, but evidences lack on the matter. It may be worth giving a few informations about the Général de Gaulle, a major military and political figure in France. He was born in 1890, fought during the First World War. He was already then highly decorated. He fought in 1940 as well and refused to accept the armistice between France and Germany, so he disobeyed the government and escaped to England. He gained the support of Winston Churchill, and he made on the 18th of June 1940 a famous speech on the BBC, the Appeal of the 18th of June, which is regarded as the origin of the French resistance. He led from London the Free French Forces, which is a resistance front, or a government in exile of sorts, even though there was a French government in France, the Vichy regime. Charles de Gaulle is a grand figure, who would later become an undisputed leader in France. We will talk about de Gaulle many more times in this project.
I attempted to trace any family of Mr. Lefebvre, and I was helped by the Gonesse Town Hall and Archives, Séverine Lemire, Julie, but unfortunately I forgot her last name, and Christian Declercq. A huge thanks to them. And if by any chance you know of someone related to the Lefebvre family, please let me know. I would be very pleased to get in touch and sure the text I wrote doesn't contain any errors.
My sources for this episode are once again the fantastic book Red Triangles in Auschwitz by Claudine Cardon-Hamet and the website Mémoire Vive. Thank you very much for listening. Next episode will be about the undesirables.
31,000, 45,000, the story of two trains of French resistance. A podcast by Mathieu Landour-Engel.